Hello, and welcome to channel Ein Key, and I am your host, Voluntary. I have recently read a very interesting article. It isn't interesting because it is good. There is more than one way something can be interesting. This is one of those examples of it being interesting in another way. For years, there has been a problem really vexing the woke. The problem is that there are minorities who simply refuse to fall into line, do what they are told, think what they are told, and vote the way they are told. There are many notable examples throughout the years. There's Clarence Thomas as one of the most prominent examples, but also Milo Yiannopoulos, Candace Owens, Lauren Chen, and a host of others with different opinions from each other. All they have in common is that they have an opinion other than that which the woke have designated that they should have. If you are black and haven't decided who to vote for, Joe Biden says that means you aren't black. For a long time, the woke, and they didn't call themselves that back then, tried to say that anyone who strayed from the approved lines of thought had internalized bigotry and were victimizing themselves. But there was a problem with that. Those they tried to pity refused their pity, as they refused to call themselves victims. Well, if they refuse pity and refuse to call themselves victims, and yet also engage in the crime of wrongthink, what is to be done with them? If you look at the woke thought process carefully, you will see that the dichotomy is either white or victim. Since they refuse to be victims, they must be white. How can someone be white and not white at the same time? For a long time, this was a stumbling point. Some of those who refused to fall into line were treated with very nasty racial epithets. Clarence Thomas has been consistently referred to as Uncle Clarence Thomas. There is an internet rumor that Michael Steele has, at one point, been pelted with Oreos. True or false, it is still another racist act. This is why Republicans have for years said that the Democrats are the real racists. So let us look at the article. Headline: Opinion. To understand Trump's support, we must think in terms of multiracial whiteness. Right underneath the headline is a picture of none other than Enrique Tarrio, a leader of the Proud Boys, and his politically correct designation is Latino. Remember, we are supposed to think that the Proud Boys are white supremacists, and that means that this guy is supposed to be one as well. And we are supposed to think that a bunch of white supremacists regard a Latino as their leader. The author is a person called Cristina Beltran. She is an associate professor of social and cultural analysis. She's also the author of Cruelty as Citizenship: How Migrant Suffering Sustains White Democracy. Who would have ever imagined that it would be a race warrior writing this article? Of course, it isn't a white progressive writing this, because they would be too afraid to say anything. They would need permission from someone like this author. The article starts out by talking about how the protest was so very white. But much to her dismay, there were other people there who weren't white. The Trump administration's anti-immigrant, anti-civil rights stance has made it easy to classify the president's loyalists as a homogeneous mob of white nationalists. But take a look at the FBI's posters showing people wanted in the insurrectionist assault on the U.S. Capitol. Among the many white faces are a few that are clearly Latino or African American. Such diversity highlights the fact that President Trump's share of the Latino vote in November actually rose over 2016, notwithstanding years of incendiary rhetoric targeting Mexicans and other Latino communities. Yes, Trump's voters and his mob are disproportionately white. But one of the more unsettling exit poll data points of the 2020 election was that a quarter to a third of Latino voters voted to re-elect Trump. Oh dear, she went there and had to throw in the jab that Trump support is mostly white in a country that is mostly white. Yet even she noticed that there were minorities among the crowd, and there are minorities who fail to follow the approved ideology. One of the organizers of the Stop the Steal movement is Ali Alexander, a Trump supporter who identifies as black and Arab. The chairman of the neo-fascist Proud Boys is Enrique Tarrio, a Latino raised in Miami's Little Havana, who identifies as Afro-Cuban. When he arrived in Washington for the January 6th march, he was arrested for allegedly burning a Black Lives Matter banner taken from a black church the month before. What are we to make of Tarrio, and more briefly, of Latino voters inspired by Trump? And what are we to make of unmistakably white mob violence that also includes non-white participants? I call this phenomenon multiracial whiteness, the promise that they too can lay claim to the politics of aggression, exclusion, and domination. That's the sting. Finding even more people of more colors who support Trump, she has abandoned the "you have internalized your own oppression" line, and now says they're actually white. According to this author, there's a right way and a wrong way for Republicans to try to approach Latinos. They're supposed to say, "You're religious, we're religious, let's work from there." Trump, by contrast, knows nothing of the history of Latinos in the United States and rarely even pretends to find value in Latinos' distinct identities. Rather than offering his non-white voters recognition, Trump has offered them multiracial whiteness. Rooted in America's ugly history of white supremacy, indigenous dispossession, and anti-blackness, multiracial whiteness is an ideology invested in the unequal distribution of land, wealth, power, and privilege, a form of hierarchy in which the standing of one's section of the population is premised on the debasement of others. Multiracial whiteness reflects an understanding of whiteness as a political color and not simply a racial identity, a discriminatory worldview in which feelings of freedom and belonging are produced through the persecution and dehumanization of others. Multiracial whiteness promises Latino Trump supporters freedom from the politics of diversity and recognition. For voters who see the very act of acknowledging one's racial identity as itself racist,
The politics of multiracial whiteness reinforces their desired approach to colorblind individualism. In the politics of multiracial whiteness, anyone can join the MAGA movement and engage in the wild freedom of unbridled rage and conspiracy theories. Multiracial whiteness offers citizens of every background the freedom to call Muslims terrorists, demand that undocumented immigrants be rounded up and deported, deride BLM as a movement of thugs and criminals, and accuse Democrats of being blood-drinking pedophiles. You have to love that description. There's a lot of loaded language I could pick apart. So much that would easily lend itself to much off-topic rambling. Once you boil out all the petty slights and get to the core of her argument, it is those minorities who support Trump, they're not black or Hispanic or Asian or whatever else. They have officially had their race revoked for the crime of wrongthink. Since they are now white, it is perfectly acceptable to call them racists. That's the other shoe. For a long time, the woke have tried to say, if you call a minority person a racist, that is proof you are a racist. That deprived them of their favorite insult against their more difficult targets. Now these wrong thinkers are white, in spite of whatever color or genetic background they have. It is perfectly safe to call them racists and white supremacists. They refuse to be victims. They must be white. They're not white. They're multiracially white. That makes them white enough to insult. Now we will get to see the spectacle of seeing people like Candace Owens, Lauren Chen, and Enrique Tarrio referred to as multiracial white racists. It makes me wonder what is next. Will Christina Hoff Sommers and Wendy McElroy be considered multi-gender male misogynists? Will Mayo Yiannopoulos be considered a multi-orientation straight homophobe? Will Blair White be considered a multi-gendered cis transphobe? The irony, of course, will be lost on the woke. In this article, the author attacked individualism because everyone is supposed to conform to their group. The woke are busy telling people, believe this, or you are not allowed to be of a certain race, and don't see how everyone else thinks that is racist. Thank you for watching. We're now in the double digits for subscribers, and hopefully we will only keep growing. So please like, share, comment, and subscribe to help my channel grow.